In this video, I'm going to show you how to make this very simple ruined building for like Warhammer 40,000. However, I'm not going to spend a single penny on that. And this includes the tools, the paint, and like pretty much everything you see on here. I'll show you how I did it. So to start with, we're going to need some equipment and materials. I'm going to use a kitchen knife that actually the dog chewed many years ago. That just means I don't get told off by the wife. Then I head out into the garden, get some old paint that we had. I've got this purple, like a dark grey and a light grey. Pretty much just going to use the two greys. That's very fortunate that I have them. And then into the kitchen, I've got these little tubs of super glue that we have, and I also have a glue stick. Not ideal, but that's what we're going to go with. Then I'm going to take some corrugated cardboard, and I'm just going to cut this into size. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to do 2 walls worth of material, because I'm going to fold the wall to make the right angle rather than glue 2 walls together. I cut it out using some scissors at first. That doesn't work very well, so then I revert to the old kitchen knife, which I don't recommend because it's more dangerous to use like a blunt serrated blade than it would be to use a proper like extendable hobby knife. Once I've cut that to shape, I'm going to start putting on my design. Now I've got a template that I used for my foam building. I'm pretty much just going to do the exact same thing here, but I'm going to modify the windows so that they're rectangular instead of an archway. But other than that, it's pretty much exactly the same. I've got some vertical strips and some horizontal strips just to add detail to the outside. Draw that onto your card. So the one side that you draw it on properly, that's your outer side. For the inside, all you really need is the vertical columns where they're going to be. Then we simply cut out the windows, which with this knife, not particularly easy, but with a normal knife, you won't have any problems. Keep the little insert to the window bits because we're going to use them in a moment. And then on the card, I'm going to just take a pen and mark where I want the damage to be. We're just going to damage basically like the top right corner and the top left corner, and it'll end up looking like a ruined building. Mark that on with a pen, cut it out with a knife. When you're cutting out and damaging your wall sections, you want to keep the little bits you cut off because we're going to use them a little bit in a moment as well. And then I fold it, and the way that I fold it is I literally just take my metal ruler, shove it into the card. I think in this case I had to score the card a little bit to get it to fold, but you know, it doesn't have to be perfect. And then I'm going to take the little window inserts that I was talking about and cut them into 5mm strips. We're going to use these as like a little window ledge. I glue them in place using my Pritt stick. PVA would be better, hot glue would be better and quicker. The next bit we're going to do is the ground floor and the first floor. And what we're going to do here is get some card. Now you want to make sure that it's got a nice 90-degree right angle cut on this, or like maybe it was from the box itself. And what I'm going to do is just shove it into place, put the walls around it, and then from each end draw a little squiggly line. And then for the first floor, we're going to do exactly the same thing, do it a little bit inward so that the floor isn't quite as big as the bottom. So for the ground floor, I take a barbecue stick and I shove it through the floor at like a 45-degree angle. I figured that would help with the warping. All it sort of did was create a little lump in the floor. And then I wanted the ground to look like it had soil and dirt on it without thinking I actually didn't have the paints. So I cover the whole thing in my Pritt stick and sprinkle on some sodium bicarbonate, basically baking powder. That didn't work very well. It was a little bit splotchy. So we take the bits of wall that we cut off before and we just sort of rip them into various chunks and we glue them to the floor. I'm using super glue here rather than Pritt stick because nothing else would really glue to this. So to glue the floor to the walls of the building, I use Pritt stick and I use super glue. Now, whilst I'm using super glue, I also try and fill in the cracks by putting in some super glue in the cracks and then sprinkling on the bicarbonate soda, the baking powder. That basically creates like a really nice sort of like hard plastic, and it essentially like a bad version of hot glue. So I'm using that to essentially weld the two together. Most of the detail on this project is essentially going to be 2cm wide bits of cardboard, and that's what we're going to do here for the inside of the building. I basically measure where I want the floor to be, and then I cut out these 2cm strips to be this height. So I cut these cardboard strips so they're all the same height, and I glue them into place using a combination of Pritt stick and super glue. And the reason I'm doing it at a set height is so that the floor can sort of like rest on them a little bit, just to try and make it a bit firmer. Now for the actual first floor, I shove in 2 barbecue sticks that go against the grain of the corrugation. Now that is to make this a lot more sturdier. It's not really to worry about warping, it's just so that the card can actually sustain the weight of models and that kind of stuff. I leave a little bit of the barbecue sticks exposed to look like rebar. It's a bit big for rebar, but it's what I use. And then I glue that in place using the combination of Pritt stick and super glue and the bicarbonate soda that I mentioned before. And then for this first floor, I do the exact same thing with the 2cm strips of cardboard going up the vertical. I let these go above the roof level because I'm going to trim them all off at the end. For the outside of the building, it's way easier. It's literally just long strips of 2cm bits of cardboard. The only tricky bit is the right angle bit where the fold is. What I do here is I basically just make one of the card pieces, instead of being 2cm, I make it about 2.2 centimeters, and that's just because you're going to get a little bit of an overhang. Any little gaps and stuff like that we're going to fill in later. For the horizontal strips, I literally just put the card in place and mark it with a pen and then cut it to size. Once everything's dried, I just come in with my blade and level everything off at the top. Chopping them off is quite fun. And then the build is pretty much nearly done. Like, it actually looks pretty decent, I think, at this point. Now, controversially here, I did a poll on the community page on YouTube, and it turns out about 70% of you had filler in your house that wasn't for terrain purposes. And I know growing up, that's something that we definitely had. So I'm using some filler, presuming that a lot of you will already have it. And then to get started with the filler, spackle or joint compound, whatever it is, I'm going to mix that in with my darkest grey. That dark grey is actually what I painted this room with. Now, for my first go with this filler, what I'm actually going to do here is a very thick mixture of filler, so there's not that much paint in it, and this gives me a really thick texture because we're going to use this filler to basically cover in all of the corrugation marks. So that's on the window ledges, that's on the sides of the corrugation where you can see, and it's easier to do with thicker bits of filler than it would be with like a watered down version of it. Once that had dried, I'd made a slightly more like liquid version of it, so it was more paint and a little bit of water. I want this to be able to be textured, but I don't want it to be super thick, because I'm literally just going to take this one big paintbrush that I have and just paint it all over the cardboard, and then I'm going to stipple it to try and get a little bit of a texture. You don't want too much texture because it will look unnatural and look like bad stucco. You just want a little bit of a texture with a little bit of stipple. At this point, or in any other of my cardboard builds, you might notice that when you add this wetness, be it filler or paint, that it sort of feels like it's starting to disintegrate. You want to leave it there and let it dry, because cardboard just becomes a bit of mulch if you get too much wet on it. You want to just let it dry and then come back and either like do a second cover or do the bits that you've missed. So do your first coat with your filler. I try as much as I can to cover up my barbecue stick lines, but I don't really do a good job there. Also, I just basically covered the ground floor because the bicarbonate soda and Pritt stick didn't do a great job. Then on stream, I painted all the dark grey, and then I literally just dry brush it the lighter grey. Then I take an old paint from Games Workshop and I paint the rebar, only a very small amount here, so I was okay using that. And then I take an old black paint, which is Chaos Black, a little bit of that and quite a bit of water, and basically make myself a weak black wash using like a little bit of your model paint. Please don't normally use your model paints on your terrain. You should use like crapper, worse paint that's cheaper. Make myself a little black wash, cover the whole thing in that, call it a day. Pretty happy with the way that it looks. So that's how I made some terrain without spending anything. I just wanted to show that even though you think maybe you don't have anything right now and it's something you want to get into, you know, if you scrounge around a little bit and you're a little bit creative, you might be able to do it without spending any money. Thank you to my Patreons. I do really appreciate you guys for supporting the channel. Like the video, please. Goodbye.